Hi, welcome to City Vision's grant writing course. I am Andrew Sears. I am the course designer for this course, and you'll be working with your instructor for this course, Barbara Clemenson. The first big assignment that you all have is to do grant research, and I want to talk a little bit about grant research. Let me also just give you a little bit of my own background in grant writing. So I've been doing grant writing for Tech Mission, that's the parent of City Vision, for about 15 years now. During that time, I've probably raised about $20 million in grants, federal, Christian foundations, secular foundations, a lot of different state sources. And so what I'm going to try to do is try to really explain to you some of the best practices of what I've learned over that period. I've also supervised probably 10 different grant writers in the process, and have done pretty well in a lot of the grant competitions. So let me tell you, just to start off, even before grant writing, I see a lot of people make a lot of mistakes. They'll spend 100 hours working on a grant, and the problem is that they're writing a grant for a foundation that they have almost no chance of getting it, and in some cases they actually have zero chance because they don't even qualify for the grant. So one thing that I want to emphasize, even though this is a grant writing course, identifying the right funder is actually more important than the grant you write. So if you write a perfect grant and you send it to the wrong funder, that's not going to help you. If you write a really good grant and you send it to a corporate foundation that has, and this is actually fairly common, 1,000 grant proposals for every grant they're going to give, you're not going to have a very good chance. Your chances are about the same as with the lottery. So number one, what you need to do is you need to identify the right funder. And what you need to do is you need to do research on their website to verify that you qualify. So they're going to have geographic limitations, they're going to have programmatic limitations. Don't just go off of what's in the databases, because the databases are going to be old. You need to go and look on their websites directly, or if they don't have a website, contact them. The other thing that you generally want to do is usually you want to call to just verify that the information you have is correct and that you qualify. So it can be a quick call. You aren't trying to sell your opportunity at all. You're just, if they have a phone number, you want to call, because sometimes what happens is even their website will be out of date, and they'll say, we're actually not doing any grants this year. So the last thing you want to do is spend 100 hours on a grant proposal and then send it to someone that they didn't update their website. So, and sometimes on the qualifications, there may be things that aren't listed on their website, and some sites don't have websites. And then the last thing that I'll say, and we'll talk about this more, is after submitting a grant, you really want to try to get a meeting or a conference call. I've found that depending on the type of foundation, getting a meeting or conference call is going to increase your chances of getting a grant by 10 to 100 times. So what really separates the good grant writers from the others is getting the meeting or conference call. Now that's true with foundations. That's not true on federal grants. Usually they're more objective. So let me tell you what makes a good grant funder. Number one, you need to be looking, do they accept unsolicited proposals? So what that means is if they didn't invite you and they say they don't accept unsolicited proposals, then you shouldn't apply to them because they're going to throw it away. The other is, do you meet their geographic and programmatic criteria? Some will only fund youth programs, K through 8 youth programs. Some will only fund schools. Some will only fund adult programs. Some will only fund Christian programs. Some won't fund Christian programs. Some will only fund programs within a given city or location. The other thing you want to do is you want to try to find out whether they've funded organizations with programs similar to yours. You can find that information usually on their annual report of the foundation. They'll say who they funded. Sometimes you can find that information through Guidestar, which we'll talk about later. But one of the most important things that I always had our grant writers do is to try to assess the giving ratio. Sometimes you can get this whenever you call them. You can say, just roughly how many grants do you give out versus how many applications do you get, and here's the general guidelines that I've found. Everyone goes for the corporate foundations, and what they don't realize is that almost all corporate foundations typically have more than 100 applicants for every grant. A lot of them will have 1,000 or sometimes even 10,000 applicants for every grant. So, you can submit to those, but recognize that, your chances, it's a little bit like buying a lottery ticket, so it may not be, the best chance. Now, the exception is there's some corporate foundations that are very locally focused. They're not doing, the 10,000 to 1 application would be like, say, the Coca-Cola Foundation. Very public, very visible. What you're looking for is the smaller companies, or not smaller companies, but locally focused companies that have a big reason. Maybe they're one of the major employers in a city, and they have a reason to invest in that city. So those are going to have better odds. Local foundations actually have the best odds. Typically, sometimes that can be a community foundation, like your city name foundation. Here we have the Boston Foundation, or the Kansas City Foundation. Then there's Christian foundations. It can usually be anywhere from 10 to 100 applicants per grant. And then I would say this is also similar to family foundations, and that's usually smaller foundations that will usually have a family name as a part of their foundation. And in the Christian foundations, and especially small family foundations, it's really hard to get funding without a meeting. So your goal there, you might have to submit. Often it's a letter of intent that you'll have to do, and that's part of what you'll have to figure out is, what's the process? Do you first submit a letter of intent and then get, the next tier, or do you submit a full proposal? Federal grants are a unique category. Typically, you're going to have 50 to 500 applicants per grant, and applying for federal grants is a little different than other grants. It's more like if you're good at if you're good at taking tests and you're someone who always got a 99 or 100 on tests, federal grants are essentially like that. You need to get a 99. They're going to have a score sheet. You need to understand what their score sheet is. And if you don't understand that, you're probably not going to do well. I'll talk more about that, but typically federal grants, you need to be able to write essentially a perfect grant. It's less about relationships and it's more about writing the perfect grant. Then state and local is usually a combination of relationships and the perfect grant. So sources for grant information. So in this course, we're going to be using GrantStation, Guidestar, urban.org, and christianvolunteering.org. The other good sources, so Foundation Center actually has the best online directory, but they're also one of the most costly. And then the other sources, actually the number one source I use in my grant writing is peer organizations. I look at the annual reports or the websites of our peers, and I see who funded them. So say you're in some sort of the field of addiction, you want to look at addiction organizations that are doing training, for addiction or something along those lines, and see who funded them. The other thing would be web searches. So if you're looking for addiction grants, right, just do a web search for, addiction grants, and then see what you find. So a lot of times it's good to use the databases, but the web can actually be useful too. So let me just go on to the next part and just kind of give you an overview of some of the different websites. So what you're going to do in this week is you're actually going to be creating accounts on all these websites. So with GrantStation, it actually costs generally about $200 to get a GrantStation account. You're getting that in this course for free, and we're going to send you the information on what you need to do to create that account. So you'll have a search that you can go through. I'm going to show you on Christian Volunteering. We have a foundation search on the site, and you can use the search up top, but you can also use down at the bottom. You can go through, so you can see we have 10,932 grants, and then and these are potential groups that will fund Christian organizations. So say your ministry is very Christian and you want to do evangelism. You're not likely to get secular funders to fund evangelism. So you might, go down into, there's these different categories of funders. There's Christian foundations, independent foundations. So you go into the Christian foundations. And then within the Christian foundations, you could say, I'm located in Illinois, so I want to get foundations that I know are focused on Illinois. Now, a lot of them are going to be nationally focused, so you could look at those. Or, this view here is actually sorted by size. And let me also just kind of explain to you. There's a spreadsheet that you're given and that you should download. And in that, there's different tabs. So what you're going to do in your assignment is you're asked to provide the information for at least, I think it's 10 foundations. And what you should do is you should list the foundation name. So I started with a sample. So Generation Trust, I doubt if that's going to be a fit for any of you. So it's just an example. And then you'd put a fit score, so what you want to do is you want to score them. So if you're looking at these later, you could just, do a sort and identify, the ones that were a good fit for you. Then you can look at the website. You want to get the website of the foundation. Then if you got information from them from a database, that's going to be a link to their profile in the database. So if you got it off christianvolunteering.org, you could do that. Or actually, you usually want to link the most detailed profile, which is most likely going to be GrantStation if they have it. You want to write down what their funding interest is. Do they accept unsolicited? If the answer is no, really you shouldn't even be putting them on here. But unless you think there's a way you can get them to actually invite you. Because you know someone who is connected with them. Then another thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get a link to their Guidestar, and I'll show you how to get to that in a minute. Do they target your city or region? And then you want to go to their website and look at when are their grant due dates. And then over here you want to just write down any other notes. I know that Generation Trust is focused on Los Angeles, so I wanted to write that down. So you're going to do that for 10 different foundations. Generation Trust doesn't count as one of your 10, so you'll need to get to at least row 12 here. And one way you could do that also, so there's a tab in here, the Christian Foundations tab. What this is this is actually the database from christianvolunteering.org, and it's a way that makes it easier for you to go through the data. We've actually sorted it based on the size of the foundation, the total giving. So the largest foundations are listed at the top, and often that's a good starting point, because that also gets into the funding ratio. You want to know and whether it's a good fit. If the foundation only gives out 5 grants of $1,000 each and they get 100 applicants, that's probably not going to be a good opportunity. But if they give $10,000 grants and they don't have that many applicants, then it's going to be more attractive. But the larger foundations often will be giving more grants. And then here's just other information that you can get from that. So what I've done actually with Tech Mission is I've actually gone through, and this is just an example of whether I think they would fit with Tech Mission and City Vision. I put, I didn't actually score them. I just put a yes, no, or maybe. And then some of them where we already applied, I put already. So that could be an approach that you take too. So that's christianvolunteering.org, the grant directory there. Let me just show you Guidestar, how it works. So you can create an account on Guidestar. I've already created an account. All the accounts are free for both Guidestar and christianvolunteering.org. And then you can search for a foundation. So I searched for McClellan Foundation. They're one of the largest Christian foundations. And then you get information. So often there's multiple foundations, so you need to make sure that you get the right one, you get the right address. So I'm going to go to the McClellan Foundation, and I'm going to look at their profile just so that I can have more information. This shows some basic information about them. You can look at their financials here. Sometimes if they have that, they don't have that here. But the Form 990, that's actually, so this is the tax document that every single nonprofit and foundation in the United States has to fill out. So the main value of the Form 990 is to be able to just find publicly available information. So it can take some getting used to, but this gives you financial information. How much did they give? 15 million. Some foundations will actually list where they gave to. This is a list of their board members. That could potentially be useful to see if you know anyone who knows their board members. Then often they have to list their investments. That's not usually of interest to you, although it can be helpful if their investments went down. And then this is a list of all their investments on their website. And then this is actually the list of who they gave to. So you find a foundation, you say, okay, this might be a good foundation for us, and then you look to see, and this is sideways, but you could download this and look at it yourself, and you could say, is this a good fit for us? And be careful and don't confuse the lists that are there. Often most of the lists that you're going to see in here are actually going to be from investments, but then you'll see other things where they actually gave grants to things. So this is just going through their expenses. This I think again is investments. So usually before I go to a foundation, I'm always going to look at their 990 before I invest, because you essentially want to do your homework before you submit something. So you would take the link of this. So say you're doing McClellan, you'd take that link and you'd put it into your spreadsheet under your research log. So for the first assignment, what you're doing is you're filling in 10 things in your research log. Next week we're going to talk about a lot of other ways to go through research. How do you do a top 10 plan? How do you look at peer organizations? And how do you actually look at the giving for these different foundations where they gave? So hopefully that's helpful for you. And if you have any questions, you can ask your instructor, Barbara Clemenson. Thanks a lot.